and welcome to a quick discussion of Final Fantasy VII. So I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that Final Fantasy VII is probably one of the most influential JRPGs of all time. It released for the PlayStation in 1997 to critical acclaim and commercial success. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is still one of the best-selling Final Fantasy games even after all this time. At the time, JRPGs were really popular in Japan, but not particularly popular in the West. So in America, as an example, we only got 3 Final Fantasies, which were 1, 4, and 6. 4 and 6 were released as 2 and 3, so with 7, they finally went back to the actual numbers, thankfully. Meanwhile, in Europe, they wouldn't get a mainstream Final Fantasy until this game. Their only Final Fantasy before this was Mystic Quest, which was a spin-off title, and not a good one from what I've heard, except for the music. So outside of just being a really iconic and beloved game, it really brought the JRPG genre to the forefront, something I'm really thankful for, because this is one of my favorite genres of games. I love a lot of JRPGs, and I feel like, to some extent, I have Final Fantasy VII to thank for that, even though I would not play Final Fantasy VII until about, 2013 or something like that. So, as iconic as this game was, and is, actually, I wouldn't end up playing this game until the PlayStation 3 era. My first Final Fantasy was 13. I suppose that wasn't a bad call, because it was only uphill from there. But then I played the DS games, 3 and 4 DS, the GBA ports of 1 and 2, let's see, and then also the PS2 games, like 10, 12, 10-2. So 7 was one of the last Final Fantasies I actually got to. So I think that affected my opinion of the game. To go into that really quickly, I like 7. It's in my top 5. I would go 9, 10, 6, 4, 7. So while I don't think I'd put it top Final Fantasy ever, it's still a fantastic game. It's got really iconic moments, like the entire opening section that we just saw. I think is probably one of the most iconic openings in a JRPG in a Final Fantasy game. I don't know if I'd say in gaming period, because that's a lot, but I just feel like that opening shot is just so memorable and stands out. So graphically, the game was highly praised for being revolutionary at the time. Being a PS1 game, everything was a lot more sprite-based than the previous Final Fantasy games, so we actually have pre-rendered backgrounds, full character models, FMVs. Nowadays, they don't hold up particularly well. Specifically, the pre-rendered backgrounds look really bad now. This is the PS4 version, which is a port of the Steam version, which I think is a port of the iOS version, and was heavily criticized at the time of its reveal. So, to give some perspective on that, because of how beloved Final Fantasy VII is, people have been clamoring for a remake for a long time. Originally, a tech demo was shown off showing a PS3 remake that never materialized into an actual game, but people had been hoping ever since that we might actually get a remake. So, flash forward to the mid-2010s, around 2015, Square Enix announces something Final Fantasy VII related at I think the Game Awards. And it turned out to just be a port of the Steam version, and everyone got their hopes up that would be a full remake. So luckily we ended up actually getting the full remake. It just took a few more years after that. Just earlier this year in 2020, finally got the full Final Fantasy VII remake, at least part 1 of the remake. I am planning to do a separate video on Final Fantasy VII Remake, so I'm going to save a lot of my thoughts on that game for later. But this original version holds up surprisingly well. If you can get over the really bad-looking graphics, which are just a product of its age, really, there was a solid turn-based JRPG here. It's not as good, again, even compared to, like, I would say the Final Fantasy IX, though I admit Final Fantasy IX has a whole slew of problems. 7 is still a fantastic time if you're willing to try out this style of game. I feel like turn-based JRPGs are always kind of polarizing, hence the popularity in action RPGs in recent years, but I still really like these. I grew up with Mario and Luigi and Paper Mario, went on to play Final Fantasy and some other turn-based JRPGs, and still really like this style. And also, the Final Fantasy series at the time did a lot to differentiate itself from even other turn-based games of its era. Specifically the active time battle system, or ATB, which you have to basically wait for the right gauge to fill up before you can attack. So there's a bit of a timing element to everything, so that adds a layer of strategy compared to just choosing commands. As much as I love turn-based JRPGs, I do like when they manage to find little twists to spice up the gameplay, such as the action commands in Mario & Luigi and Paper Mario, and the active time battle system in Final Fantasy. So as we make our way down to the first reactor, going over the story a little bit, we are Cloud Strife, a mercenary who is working with a group called Avalanche, that wants to destroy the reactors of a company called Shinra, because these reactors are being used to drain the life out of the planet. So, the story is really solid, except I'm not going to go into specifics because there was a remake, so I don't want to comment on specific spoilers, because a lot of people are just experiencing this game in one form or another for the first time. But, as much as I like the story, it kind of loses momentum at the very end for me. Basically, in my opinion, Final Fantasy VII has amazing pacing, except for literally the very end of the game, which I find a little bit anticlimactic. Well, like, it's not even a bad ending, it's just kind of like, after everything, it's just a little bit disappointing. So yeah, other than, the graphics and not completely meshing with the ending, it's still a great time. Also, going into a little bit of its popularity, Final Fantasy VII also got its own spin-off universe called the Compilation of Final Fantasy VII, a multimedia project. I think there were books, a movie, an anime OVA, like at least 3 games? There might have been 4, because I know there was a mobile game, but I don't remember how many mobile games there were. I think there were 2 mobile games. And then a PS2 game and a PSP game, all set in the same universe around this timeline. And that was in the mid-2000s, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, weirdly enough, my first experience with Final Fantasy VII was randomly finding Advent Children, the movie, on YouTube, and then watching it and having no clue what was going on. Probably not the best introduction. I've been kind of wanting to go back and watch it now that I actually know these characters, but I've never gotten around to that. So there's also a magic system, and also another system called the Materia system. Materia are little orbs of magic that you can put into armor and weapons to give you the ability to use those types of magic and other buffs as well in battle. So for example, Cloud by default has Ice and Bolt materia, so we can use those types of magic. So again, it's very much a classic turn-based JRPG, but it does a lot of really cool things. And yeah, this era of Final Fantasy really did that. Like, starting with 4 onwards, they did a lot of cool things. There's also the back row system, where characters in the back row do reduced damage, but also take reduced damage, except Barrett, for example, has a gun, so his damage output is not affected, so it's good to keep him in the back row. Again, this game does a lot of really cool things. Even now, I find myself really enjoying these older Final Fantasy games, even though they're not exactly easy on the eyes. It's still a great time. So, another problem I have with Final Fantasy, the Final Fantasy PS1 era, is performance. So, the fields have a frame rate of 30 frames per second. The battles have a frame rate of, if I'm not mistaken, 15 frames per second. And things like, I think, menus and the transitions into battles are 60. The menus being 60, I'm not entirely sure about, because some games have the menus at 60 FPS. Some of the remasters capped the menus to 30, or below, I'm pretty sure, in the case of 8 Remastered. So I'm not entirely sure about the menu. Here's our first boss, the Guard Scorpion, weak to lightning magic, and will raise up at the tail at some point, and when its tail's up, we should not attack it. So this is a case where the active time battle system really shines, because we want to make sure that we don't set up an attack when it's gonna counter us. So for example, I'm gonna kind of sit here and see if it's gonna do anything, and then if it's just gonna do search scope, then I'm free to do a regular attack. So again, the active time battle system I find really fascinating. It's a really cool idea, and I'll go into this a little bit more, but I'm glad that the remake actually kind of tried to work around that a little bit in its own way, because it's a very different style of game. So again, now that we know it's not gonna set up a guard stance, we're free to attack regularly, and we should almost be done with this. I think, to this day, my favorite part of this game might still be the soundtrack. Most of the soundtrack is, like, super iconic, for good reason. Again, the sound quality isn't great because synthesized music, but the composition work holds up really well, hence why they remix a lot of these songs, and when they remix them, they sound really, really good. Like, in the remake, even in Kingdom Hearts, I think at least one song from this game is in Kingdom Hearts, and is really good, specifically in the HD remix versions. But yeah, also the battle graphics are a little bit better, I find. I kind of wish the battle character models were more like what the field models look like, but I get why, because technical limitations. This was a very early game into the PS1's lifespan. Very early in 3D graphics, period. But yeah, I think it holds up surprisingly well as an overall package, even though it's got some rough spots here and there. And with that, we have defeated the first boss. Take note of how long this takes, by the way, for the next discussion. That's all I'm gonna say on that for now. So now we have to escape. And yeah, while we're doing that, I feel like the characters are also pretty solid. A lot of the characters are pretty likable, have good character arcs. Like, honestly, Cloud is like my least favorite character, but honestly, I find that he does have good moments still. And it's also just more of an indication of how solid the rest of the cast is, that Cloud feels a little bit underwhelming by comparison, at least personally. So we have the limit gauge system. Since we've taken enough damage as Cloud, we can unleash a limit break to do a lot of damage. You may recognize this from Super Smash Bros., which Cloud is in. That was also a point of contention at the time, that it should have been a character from the SNES or NES era, because Cloud at that time had only appeared on a Nintendo console via Kingdom Hearts, and I'm pretty sure Theatrhythm. So Final Fantasy VII would not come to the Switch until, like, last year, I'm pretty sure, 2019, and also Xbox One. But yeah, this particular port is available on all modern platforms as of now, so if you have not played this version of the game, even if you played the remake and enjoy the universe, I would also recommend still going back to this game, because this one still has merit. And I feel like if you play this game first, you will also have a greater appreciation for what the remake does. But again, I'll save my thoughts on that for next time. But with that being said, I think I've gone through most of my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII. Overall, it holds up okay. Definitely not a looker, but everything else about this game, I think, is pretty solid. There's a couple of things that also don't hold up well, like some of the writing. Some of the writing feels very 90s at times. It doesn't entirely hold up well, but yeah, for the most part, if you have not played the game, you have plenty of options to play it. And I still think it's a great time. Again, not my favorite Final Fantasy, but I realize that, you know, quite frankly, when you have a series of 15 games, you're gonna have very divergent opinions on which is the best one or the favorite. But yeah, as good as this game is, I just would put the others a hair ahead, possibly nostalgia, because I started with those. But I still very much recognize the importance of this game to the industry, to the franchise, to the genre, to the console, because I feel like this was also a really important game because of the history between Square Enix, or at the time Squaresoft, and Nintendo, actually, because Nintendo and Square had kind of a falling out, and thus they moved over to PlayStation, which was a big deal at the time. Also because one has cartridges, one has discs, so Final Fantasy VII with so much FMV worked a lot better on PlayStation compared to Nintendo. But with that being said, yeah, I think that's my quick overview of my thoughts on this game. So with that being said, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for the next discussion.